The story of the Merovingians begins not in textbooks, but in whispers and shadows, in the quiet spaces of history that most have never thought to explore. Imagine Europe, centuries ago, a land of dense forests, winding rivers, and ancient cities rising from the mists. It was a time when kings were not merely rulers, but sacred figures, anointed with divine purpose, believed to carry a spark of something otherworldly within their veins. Among these kings, one dynasty stood apart, though most today would scarcely recognize their name. The Merovingians, rulers of the Franks, were more than a royal house. They were said to carry a secret, a lineage so profound that later generations sought not just to diminish their power, but to erase their very existence from the memory of the world. From the moment the first Merovingian king, Clovis I, united the fractured Frankish tribes under his rule, there was something unusual about this family. Their rise was swift, yet not merely political. It was ceremonial, almost mystical. Clovis was anointed in a ritual that would forever link his kingship to the divine, a gesture that symbolized the presence of the sacred within the human. In those days, kingship was more than wielding armies or administering law. It was the embodiment of a higher order, a bridge between heaven and earth. And the Merovingians were believed to be the most potent of such bridges, carrying a bloodline that, according to legend, descended from a sacred source, a lineage imbued with extraordinary authority and spiritual power. The intrigue of the Merovingians lies not only in their accomplishments, but in the deliberate silence that followed them. Their reign lasted for centuries, yet history has largely turned a blind eye to their story. They appear in chronicles and records, only to vanish suddenly, leaving tantalizing gaps that historians struggle to explain. Names disappear, documents are mysteriously lost, and artifacts vanish or are misattributed. Even the Church, which often chronicled the affairs of kings, seems to have participated in the quiet erasure, subtly rewriting the story to favor those who came after. Why would a dynasty so central to European history be treated as though it had never existed? What secret lay at the heart of the Merovingians that made them so threatening to the chroniclers of their time? The answer, many scholars of the hidden history suggest, lies in the nature of the dynasty itself. Unlike later monarchs who derived legitimacy purely through conquest or political alliances, the Merovingians claimed a form of sacred authority that could not be easily challenged. Their kingship was tied to ritual, to symbols, and to a mysterious notion of blood that carried inherent power. They were the long-haired kings, and their uncut hair was not a mere fashion, but a symbol of their connection to divine energy. This physical manifestation of their sacred status was a visible reminder to the people that they were no ordinary rulers. Every aspect of their appearance, every ceremonial act, and every marriage they arranged was steeped in a logic of power that transcended the mundane. It was a type of authority that could not be fully understood by ordinary chronicles, and perhaps that was exactly the reason later historians sought to obscure it. The legends surrounding the Merovingians stretch far beyond the political. Some speak of kings whose lives seemed intertwined with prophecy, whose deaths were recorded ambiguously, leaving room for speculation about survival and secret heirs. Others whisper of sacred relics, of secret guardians, of a continuity of power carefully hidden from view. Even their queens, the women of the bloodline, were said to carry significance that rivaled the kings themselves. In a time when history often ignored the contributions of women, the maternal line of the Merovingians is believed by some to have held the true key to their enduring legacy. It was a dynasty layered in secrecy, where the most important truths were never written in plain sight, but encoded in ritual, in symbols, and in the unbroken line of ancestry. As we begin to uncover these threads, it is crucial to notice the tension between what the world has been told and what may have actually occurred. The contrast is stark. Mainstream history presents the Merovingians as simply another early medieval dynasty, replaced by the more capable Carolingians. But closer inspection, through the lens of alternative histories, legends, and esoteric studies, reveals a far more complex narrative. This is not a story of mere succession. It is a story of power, secrecy, and deliberate suppression. It is a story in which entire records were lost, and yet traces remain, in cryptic manuscripts, in the architecture of old churches, in local legends that refuse to fade. The mystery persists, demanding that we look closer, question more deeply, and consider the possibility that what we have been taught is only part of the truth. There's a certain beauty in exploring a history that almost disappeared. It is a journey through foggy streets of medieval towns, into the darkened chambers of abbeys where monks copied texts that might contain the clues we seek. It is a journey across Europe, from the forests of France to the hidden valleys where relics and markers of the past may yet lie undiscovered. In every legend of a lost king, in every symbol etched into stone, in every fragment of genealogical record that survives, we glimpse the persistence of a secret that the centuries have tried to bury. And it is precisely that persistence, that refusal to vanish entirely, which invites us to uncover, to speculate, and to immerse ourselves in the story of the Merovingians. As we embark on this exploration, we must prepare to question assumptions. The story will unfold slowly, revealing layers of political intrigue, mystical symbolism, and hidden agendas that stretch across centuries. We will meet kings who were more than men, queens whose influence was invisible yet profound, and a network of secret orders and guardians who may have ensured the survival of a lineage that history sought to erase. This is a narrative designed not only to inform, but to mesmerize, to draw you into a world where the line between history and legend blurs, and where the echoes of the past still resonate with a quiet insistence. In the darkness between recorded facts, the Merovingian secret waits. It is a secret that survived wars, plagues, and political upheavals. It is a secret that whispers to us from the shadows, asking whether we have the courage to listen, to follow the hidden paths, and to consider that the story we have been told about European history may be only half of the truth. In the coming chapters, we will trace the rise and fall of a dynasty that should not have been forgotten, examine the symbols that survived its erasure, and confront the tantalizing possibility that the sacred bloodline of the Merovingians might not be entirely lost, even today. And in that quiet, lingering space between knowledge and mystery, we find the beginning of a journey into a past that refuses to be silenced. The fall of the Merovingian dynasty is a story as puzzling as its rise. For a people who had once dominated vast territories of what is now modern France, Germany, and beyond, their disappearance from history seems almost deliberate. The Frankish kingdom had been united under kings whose authority was not only political but sacred, yet over a few generations, their influence was eclipsed. The Carolingians, a family once merely dukes and counts within the Frankish realm, gradually took power, supplanting the Merovingians with a speed that has perplexed historians for centuries. But the real mystery is not just how the Carolingians rose. It is why the Merovingians vanished so completely from the records, their names erased, their deeds diminished, their sacred lineage rendered almost invisible. It was not a violent overthrow in the traditional sense. There were no sweeping massacres or battles that wiped out the royal line entirely. The Merovingians, in fact, continued to exist in titles and lands, but their political power dwindled, as if the machinery of history itself had turned against them. The church, the chroniclers, and the scribes played their part, rewriting the narrative in favor of the Carolingians, who were presented as the rightful heirs to Frankish power. What emerges is a quiet erasure, a subtle rewriting that makes the Merovingians appear weak, ineffective, even decadent, despite the evidence of their centuries-long rule. The story that survives is carefully curated, leaving gaps and contradictions that hint at a far more complex reality. The most striking aspect of this erasure is how methodical it seems. The Merovingians were stripped of authority, not through one decisive act, but through decades of legal manipulations, carefully arranged marriages, and the strategic appointment of puppet rulers. The last of the true Merovingian kings were reduced to mere figureheads, their ceremonial power intact, yet their ability to influence the course of the kingdom gone. It is a subtle form of political assassination, one that targets the legacy rather than the lives of its victims. And as power shifted, the chroniclers of the time, often closely tied to the church, began to depict the Merovingians as relics of a bygone age, irrelevant and unworthy of further attention. History, it seems, had been enlisted as an instrument of suppression. Yet, even in their decline, the Merovingians left traces of their enduring influence. In secret, they maintained connections, marriages, and alliances that stretched across Europe. Some historians and alternative scholars argue that while they were politically neutralized, their bloodline persisted quietly among the nobility, hidden in plain sight. Families that later claimed to be of lesser significance may have carried the sacred Merovingian line unknowingly, or perhaps by deliberate design. Legends of hidden heirs, surviving kings, and secret guardians began to circulate in whispers, though these stories were rarely, if ever, recorded in official annals. In this sense, the fall of the Merovingians was not absolute. It was a transformation, a transition from open sovereignty to shadowed survival. The erasure becomes even more enigmatic when considering the church's role. The Merovingians had long maintained a relationship with the Christian clergy, yet their model of kingship, sacred, ritualized, and partially autonomous, increasingly conflicted with the growing central authority of the church. Their kings were more than rulers. They were almost priest-kings, embodying divine authority that could not be easily subordinated to ecclesiastical oversight. The Carolingians, by contrast, were deeply entwined with the church's political agenda. By supporting their rise and chronicling their legitimacy, the church effectively rewrote the narrative, portraying the Merovingians as ineffective, weak, or spiritually flawed. Over time, these subtle distortions hardened into accepted history, the shadow of erasure growing longer with each generation. It is also notable how many artifacts, tombs, and symbols associated with the Merovingians disappeared or were repurposed. Sacred sites were claimed by new rulers, inscriptions were recarved, and important manuscripts vanished. Even the symbolism of the dynasty, the long hair, the bees, the hidden markers, was suppressed or recast to support the legitimacy of their successors. This cultural and symbolic erasure was as effective as any military conquest. It shaped perception, altering the way future generations understood their own history. The Merovingians, once omnipresent in the political and spiritual landscape of early medieval Europe, were rendered almost invisible. Despite these efforts, fragments of the dynasty's power remain, scattered like breadcrumbs through the historical record. Royal charters hint at continued influence. Cryptic references in chronicles suggest surviving heirs, and local legends preserve the memory of kings who should have been forgotten. These hints are tantalizing, suggesting that the story of the Merovingians is not fully told, that behind the veil of erasure lies a complex tale of survival, secrecy, and the quiet persistence of a sacred lineage. The fall of the Merovingians, then, is not simply a tale of decline. It is a story of suppression, of a dynasty that challenged the established order and paid the price, not necessarily with death, but with historical oblivion. In this context, the disappearance of the Merovingians is both dramatic and deliberate, a silent war fought with words, records, and symbols rather than swords. Theirs is a vanishing act that continues to fascinate, a historical enigma that compels us to question what we have been taught. As we delve deeper into their story, the tension grows, and the viewer begins to sense the threads of a narrative that mainstream history has tried to hide. What secrets did this dynasty possess that were considered too dangerous to remember? Why would centuries of chroniclers and scribes participate in a quiet conspiracy of forgetting? And perhaps most intriguingly, what traces of their power and presence might still exist, hidden, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beyond the surface? The fall of the Merovingians is more than a chapter of history. It is the foundation for a journey into mystery. It is a moment that illustrates how power, secrecy, and legacy intertwine, setting the stage for revelations that will emerge in the centuries that follow. And as we continue, following the hidden paths of kings, queens, and secret orders, the full story begins to take shape, revealing not only the fate of a dynasty, but the intricate web of influence, manipulation, and survival that has shaped the history we think we know. Long before the Merovingians would vanish from memory, their story began with a figure whose name would become both legend and historical puzzle: Clovis I. Born into a fragmented world of warring Frankish tribes, he rose to unify disparate peoples under a single rule, yet his ascent was not merely political. Clovis's kingship carried an unusual weight, one that blended temporal power with sacred authority. From the beginning, his reign was marked by ceremonies that seemed to elevate him above ordinary rulers, suggesting that he was more than a man, that he was a vessel for something divine, a bridge between the mortal world and the forces of the unseen. To the Franks, and to those who would later write secret histories, Clovis was not just a king. He was a harbinger of a new order, a sovereign whose bloodline would carry an almost mystical significance for centuries to come. The most famous moment of Clovis's life, and one that historians have often treated with a mixture of awe and skepticism, was his baptism at Reims. According to legend, this act was not simply an adoption of Christianity. It was a ritual of consecration, an event that transformed a political leader into a sacred king. The symbolism was profound. By placing his hands in the waters of baptism, Clovis was said to receive the blessing of heaven, a mark of divine favor that would legitimize his rule over both man and spirit. This fusion of religious ceremony and political authority was unusual for its time, and it set a precedent that would define the Merovingian kings for generations. The anointing at Reims, whispered sources suggest, was more than symbolic. It was a claim that the bloodline itself carried sacred power, a spiritual inheritance, as well as a temporal one. Yet even as Clovis consolidated his kingdom, there were hints of a deeper, hidden narrative. The historical accounts describe his victories in battles against rival tribes, his clever use of alliances, and his decisive actions that forged unity from chaos. But beneath the surface lies a tapestry of mystery. How did a young king of one relatively small tribe manage to dominate so completely? Some historians propose that it was more than skill or fortune, that the Merovingians possessed knowledge of sacred rituals, secret alliances, and perhaps even symbolic power that gave them an edge over ordinary rulers. Their kingship was not merely enforced by the sword. It was reinforced by symbols, by sacred rites, and by a public perception of divine legitimacy. The long-haired kings of the Merovingian line were more than monarchs. They were embodiments of a sacred ideal, and Clovis's rise was the first visible sign that this ideal could shape the course of history. The mystique of Clovis is amplified by his interactions with the church, which at first seemed to cautiously endorse his authority. The early Christian clergy recognized his baptism as a political opportunity, a chance to align a powerful ruler with the church's expanding influence. Yet even here, there was tension. Clovis's kingship was not subordinate to the church. It was parallel, a form of divine authority that could not be entirely controlled. Unlike later monarchs who were crowned with the church's blessing but ruled under ecclesiastical oversight, Clovis and his descendants were anointed as part of a sacred tradition that predated full church authority. This subtle distinction, easily overlooked in mainstream accounts, would become one of the reasons why the Merovingians were later perceived as a threat and why their story was carefully suppressed once the Carolingians and the church sought to consolidate power. The symbolism of the Merovingian kingship extends beyond ritual acts like baptism. Clovis and his descendants were identified by their long hair, a simple yet potent marker of sacred status. In a world where appearance was imbued with meaning, the uncut hair of the Merovingian kings represented continuity, divine favor, and hidden power. Some sources suggest that the hair was believed to be a vessel of energy, an extension of the sacred force flowing through the bloodline. The longer the hair, the greater the perceived power, a visual language that spoke to followers and rivals alike. When future chroniclers sought to diminish the dynasty, one of their first steps was to downplay these symbols, stripping the Merovingians of their ceremonial authority in both perception and record. Marriage, too, was a tool of sacred politics. Clovis's unions were strategic, but more than pragmatic. They were part of a broader design to preserve and expand a lineage believed to carry unique qualities. Marriages linked the Merovingians to other noble families, embedding the sacred bloodline into a network of influence that stretched across early medieval Europe. Queens were not merely consorts. They were carriers of vital ancestry, guardians of genealogical secrets, and in some traditions, custodians of mystical knowledge. The careful selection of partners ensured that the sacred Merovingian line was reinforced both genetically and symbolically, a thread of continuity that survived political turbulence and cultural transformation. Clovis's legacy, then, is not confined to chronicles or battlefields. It is encoded in rituals, in symbols, and in the perception of authority itself. His reign marks the foundation of a dynasty whose significance was as much spiritual as it was temporal. And it is precisely this duality of earthly rule and sacred inheritance that would make the Merovingians a source of fascination, fear, and ultimately suppression. The church, later dynasties, and political chroniclers may have tried to rewrite or erase their story, but the echoes of Clovis's rise persist, hinting at truths too profound for ordinary history books to contain. As we reflect on Clovis's place in this tapestry, the viewer begins to sense the pattern. A dynasty born from a fusion of politics and sacred authority, a line marked by ritual, symbolism, and secrecy. The rise of Clovis is not simply a historical event. It is the opening chapter of a hidden story, a tale in which kings are more than they appear, where power flows as much through blood and ceremony as it does through armies and law. And as we journey further into the Merovingian world, the mysteries deepen, revealing a dynasty whose origins are only partially illuminated, whose influence lingers in subtle yet persistent ways, and whose sacred heritage would eventually provoke both admiration and fear in equal measure. One of the most striking features of the Merovingian kings was something that might seem trivial to the casual observer: their hair. Not a crown, not a scepter, not an extravagant robe, but hair, long, uncut, flowing, and carefully maintained. To the modern eye, it could appear as mere vanity or a quaint custom. Yet for the Franks, and for the Merovingians themselves, it was much more than appearance. It was a symbol, a vessel, a sign of sacred authority. The long hair of the kings was believed to carry power, to mark them as chosen, and to act as a visible link between heaven and earth. In every gesture, every ritual, every public appearance, their hair broadcast their legitimacy, their divine favor, and their connection to a hidden, enduring force. Legends describe how the hair was never to be cut except in moments of disgrace or ritual abdication. Unlike ordinary rulers whose power lay solely in armies and alliances, the Merovingians' authority was inseparable from the symbolism of their hair. It was said to contain strength, almost like an extension of their soul or spirit. When chroniclers later attempted to diminish the dynasty, they mocked this practice, portraying the kings as decadent or strange. But the repetition of this symbol across generations suggests that it held far deeper meaning. The long hair was a living emblem, a crown that could not be stolen, a declaration of sacred inheritance that transcended the mundane trappings of political office. The ritual significance of the hair extended into ceremonial life. In coronations and anointings, the hair was carefully displayed, combed, and admired, often serving as a focus of reverence for the people. Priests and attendants treated it with ritual care, an acknowledgement that the hair itself was part of the sacred apparatus of kingship. Some historians suggest that the long hair was associated with health, vitality, and even mystical protection, echoing practices in other ancient cultures, such as the biblical Samson, whose strength was tied to his uncut hair. The parallel is striking. A ruler whose power is encoded in strands of hair, whose very appearance embodies a sacred contract between divine providence and earthly authority. This symbolism was not limited to the kings themselves. The Merovingians understood that power was a matter of perception, that authority could be reinforced through imagery and ritual. Long hair became a visual code, recognized by subjects, allies, and rivals alike. Those who saw the kings with their flowing locks understood at once that they were not ordinary men. They were living symbols of continuity, strength, and divine favor. In a world where the concept of legitimacy could be challenged at any moment, such visual cues were crucial. Hair was power made tangible, and those who underestimated its significance would find themselves caught unprepared for the authority it commanded. Beyond symbolism, the long hair of the Merovingians carried practical implications in the political and spiritual landscape of early medieval Europe. It served as a reminder that the king was set apart, above the ordinary, yet intertwined with the mystical. Political rivals who might have considered undermining the dynasty had to contend not only with armies or alliances, but with the perception of sacred legitimacy that radiated from the king himself. It was a subtle but powerful tool, a nonverbal assertion of authority that could influence hearts and minds without a single decree. In this sense, the hair was a silent weapon, a declaration of continuity and divine sanction that no chronicler or rival could easily erase. The concept of sacred hair also extended to ceremonial and religious contexts. Some scholars argue that the Merovingians were influenced by older Indo-European traditions, where rulers were often seen as priests as well as kings. The uncut hair may have been a vestige of these ancient rites, a lingering marker of a time when kings were seen as intermediaries between humanity and the divine. It is possible that this combination of spiritual and temporal power is what made the dynasty so threatening to the emerging structures of the church, which sought to centralize religious authority under clerical oversight. The symbolism of hair was thus a challenge, a reminder that the Merovingians' legitimacy did not derive solely from the church, but from an older, almost forgotten source of sacred authority. The long hair also intertwined with the Merovingians' perception of themselves as carriers of a sacred bloodline. Unlike other dynasties, whose legitimacy was often contested and dependent on conquest or favor, the Merovingians could claim an inherent right, a lineage imbued with divine purpose. The hair was a visible manifestation of this invisible inheritance, a tangible expression of a hidden truth. When viewed through this lens, it becomes clear why later chroniclers and rival dynasties sought to undermine and erase these symbols. To erase the hair, to mock it, was to symbolically strip the kings of their sacred essence, to make them ordinary, mortal, and therefore defeatable. History, rewritten, could obscure this truth, but the memory persisted in local traditions, in art, and in secret teachings. Even the common people, for whom the rituals of kingship might have been mysterious, could sense the power represented by the long hair. It was a visual affirmation of order, a signal that the dynasty had legitimacy beyond mere conquest. The unbroken line of hair from father to son became a living testament to the endurance of the sacred bloodline. And when the Carolingians rose, one of their first acts was to diminish this visual and symbolic authority. By cutting the hair, altering depictions, or mocking the long-haired kings, they sought to sever the connection between lineage and divinity, replacing it with a more politically convenient form of legitimacy. In this way, the Merovingians' long hair was more than a cultural quirk. It was a coded statement of identity, authority, and sacred inheritance. It bridged the visible and invisible, the temporal and spiritual, reminding all who beheld it that these kings were more than rulers. They were symbols, vessels, and carriers of a secret power that could not easily be challenged. To understand the significance of the dynasty, one must see beyond chronicles and charters into the subtle, deliberate use of ritual and symbolism that defined their very essence. The long hair was a message, a claim, and a warning. The Merovingians were chosen, and their authority was not to be dismissed lightly. Even today, the image lingers, a silent echo of a dynasty whose influence reached far beyond the battles and politics of their time, a dynasty whose sacred markers continue to inspire awe and intrigue long after their political power had been eclipsed. While the kings of the Merovingian line drew attention for their sacred hair, their ritualized power, and their divine anointing, there existed another, often overlooked source of strength: the queens. In the shadows of history, behind the throne and the ceremonial pomp, the women of the Merovingian dynasty carried the lifeblood of the sacred line. Among them, figures such as Bertha stand out, not merely as consorts or mothers of heirs, but as custodians of lineage, ritual knowledge, and influence that rivaled the kings themselves. Their importance was subtle, encoded in marriage alliances, ceremonial roles, and genealogical continuity, but was no less vital to the survival of the dynasty's hidden power. Bertha, often remembered only in passing in mainstream chronicles, was said to have been instrumental in maintaining the sanctity of the Merovingian bloodline. Married into the family as part of strategic alliances, she brought with her more than political convenience. She carried a line of descent, a sacred heritage that strengthened and legitimized the dynasty. Some historians and alternative scholars propose that the maternal line was, in many ways, more critical than the male lineage in preserving the mystical qualities attributed to the Merovingians. This idea challenges conventional views of medieval kingship, suggesting that true authority and spiritual potency flowed through the women who nurtured, guided, and protected the heirs, ensuring that the bloodline remained pure and potent. The influence of the queens extended beyond mere genealogy. They were educators, advisors, and ritual specialists, overseeing rites that ensured the continuity of sacred kingship. In a period when literacy was rare and historical records were carefully controlled, women like Bertha acted as guardians of knowledge. They understood the significance of ceremonies, the symbolism of the sacred hair, the hidden codes in religious observances, and the delicate balance between political necessity and spiritual authority. In this way, the queens were not passive figures. They were architects of legacy, shaping the dynasty in ways that would ripple across generations, even when the kings themselves were absent or politically compromised. Legends hint at a broader role for Merovingian queens, linking them to pre-Christian traditions and goddess cults that predated the arrival of Roman Christianity in the region. These women may have preserved elements of ancient knowledge, rituals, and symbolism that imbued the dynasty with a sense of sacred continuity. In many ways, the queens acted as intermediaries, connecting the royal family to older spiritual currents that the new church often sought to suppress or repurpose. It is within these hidden practices, some scholars suggest, that the true strength of the Merovingian line resided, a power carefully concealed from the eyes of outsiders and chroniclers alike. The maternal line was also a source of political strategy. Through carefully arranged marriages, the Merovingian queens linked their dynasty to other noble families across Europe, creating a network of alliances that reinforced both secular and spiritual authority. These unions were not random. They were deliberate acts of preservation, ensuring that the sacred bloodline continued even in turbulent times. The queen's role in arranging these marriages, managing estates, and overseeing the education of heirs positioned her as a central figure in the dynasty's survival. Her influence may have been invisible in official records, but it was present in every connection, every alliance, and every ritual act that perpetuated this sacred lineage. Bertha's example also illustrates the tension between visibility and secrecy. The queens operated in a world of subtle influence, where their power was recognized only by those who understood the codes, the symbols, and the rituals of the dynasty. To the casual observer, they may have appeared as mere consorts, yet in the hidden structures of the Merovingian court, they were vital players, capable of steering the course of history through council, ceremony, and lineage preservation. This hidden authority is perhaps one reason why the chroniclers of the time, often aligned with the emerging power structures of the church or rival dynasties, minimized the queen's significance, erasing their contributions from the official record. History, once again, became a tool of suppression. The legacy of the Merovingian queens also challenges our understanding of power itself. It suggests that authority is not always public, that influence can be quiet, invisible, and yet profoundly consequential. In the hidden spaces of the palace, in private rituals and family ceremonies, the queens safeguarded knowledge that would ensure the dynasty's survival long after the political structures had shifted. Their role illuminates a broader truth, that the persistence of a sacred line often depends on what is unseen. The work done behind the scenes, the careful nurturing of heirs, the preservation of rituals, and the protection of symbols that carry meaning beyond the reach of ordinary rulers. Even today, whispers of their influence survive in the fragments of history, in obscure chronicles, in local legends, and in the careful study of genealogy. Bertha and women like her are reminders that the story of the Merovingians is not solely the story of kings, battles, or public triumphs. It is also a story of guardianship, of hidden authority, and of the quiet persistence of sacred power through those who understood the importance of secrecy, continuity, and the spiritual essence of bloodlines. The maternal line, largely invisible to the official histories, was in many ways the backbone of the dynasty, and its protection was as essential as any military campaign. As we continue our exploration, the significance of these queens becomes increasingly clear. They were not footnotes, they were pillars. They maintained the continuity of a lineage that would eventually face erasure, ensuring that even in exile, in obscurity, or under threat, the sacred Merovingian line could endure. Understanding their role adds a new dimension to our appreciation of the dynasty. It is not merely a story of kingship and conquest, but a tale of preservation, of hidden influence, and of the subtle ways in which power can persist even in the shadows of history. The queens, silent yet formidable, remind us that the bloodline they protected carried secrets too dangerous, too profound, and too sacred to be entirely forgotten. Dagobert II is a figure who occupies a peculiar space between legend and recorded history, a king whose life and death have long been shrouded in mystery. Unlike his predecessors, whose reigns are documented with relative clarity, Dagobert's story is fragmented, contradictory, and strangely compelling. Some sources suggest he was assassinated in a political plot, while others hint that he escaped, vanishing into obscurity, yet leaving a legacy that would ripple through the centuries. His tale is one of survival, secrecy, and perhaps the continuation of the very bloodline that the church and rival dynasties sought to erase. Born into a time of increasing tension and political maneuvering, Dagobert II ascended the throne as a child, only to be exiled soon after. He spent years away from the Frankish court, in the safety of distant lands, surrounded by allies who recognized the latent power of his bloodline. During this exile, he is said to have grown not only in strength, but in understanding, learning the intricate balance between visible authority and hidden influence. Unlike kings who wielded power openly on the battlefield, Dagobert's survival depended on subtlety, alliances, and secrecy. His exile, rather than diminishing his significance, may have enhanced it, preserving the sacred line away from the immediate reach of political rivals. The circumstances of Dagobert II's death are equally enigmatic. Official chronicles claim he was assassinated in the forests of Belgium, a victim of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. Yet even in these accounts, details are sparse, contradictory, and suggestive of deeper truths left unsaid. Some alternative historians propose that the assassination was staged, that Dagobert escaped and lived on in secrecy, passing his lineage to a hidden network of supporters and descendants. Whether literal or symbolic, this narrative of survival underscores a recurring theme in Merovingian history: the persistence of a sacred bloodline against the forces of erasure. Dagobert's potential survival is more than a curious anecdote. It has profound implications for understanding the continuity of the Merovingian line. If he indeed escaped, it would suggest a deliberate effort to protect the dynasty's sacred inheritance, ensuring that heirs remained hidden and safeguarded from the church and rival dynasties. The Merovingians had long understood that true power was not solely political. It was spiritual, genealogical, and ritualistic. By preserving Dagobert and his descendants, they were preserving not only a bloodline, but also the essence of sacred kingship itself. The very act of survival becomes a symbol of resistance against historical erasure, a defiance encoded in secrecy rather than overt rebellion. This notion of survival is supported by local legends and obscure records that hint at Dagobert's presence in places far removed from the political centers of his time. Some accounts place him in secluded abbeys, protected by loyal supporters who recognized the value of his lineage. Others suggest he moved under the cover of anonymity, marrying into lesser-known noble families, thereby embedding the sacred bloodline in unexpected corners of Europe. These stories, while difficult to verify through conventional historical methods, provide tantalizing evidence that the Merovingian line may have persisted in ways that were carefully concealed from official chroniclers. Dagobert II's significance also lies in the symbolic weight of his existence. He represents the vulnerability of sacred lineage, constantly under threat from those who sought to consolidate power and control history. At the same time, he embodies resilience and continuity, a reminder that bloodlines, particularly those perceived as sacred or divinely ordained, often survive even the most systematic efforts at erasure. His story bridges the gap between the Merovingians' early ceremonial power and the later whispers of hidden heirs and secret guardians, illustrating how a dynasty could endure in shadow even as its public authority waned. The mysterious nature of Dagobert's life and death also invites reflection on the broader patterns of history. It is striking how often royal figures who embody sacred or unusual authority are rendered invisible, their stories obscured, and their significance downplayed. Dagobert II fits this pattern, a king whose life challenges the neat narratives of succession and conquest. By examining the contradictions, gaps, and local legends surrounding his existence, we gain insight into the mechanisms of suppression that shaped the historical record, revealing not only the fate of one king, but the deliberate erasure of an entire lineage. Dagobert's story also raises questions about the guardians of the bloodline. If he survived and continued the lineage in secrecy, who protected him? What networks of allies, both secular and religious, ensured his safety? Some suggest that early secret societies, proto-priories, or loyalist factions may have existed precisely to safeguard such heirs, maintaining continuity while remaining hidden from public view. The idea that the survival of a single individual could influence centuries of history underscores the fragility and resilience of dynasties whose power is both sacred and political. Every whispered account of Dagobert in exile hints at an intricate web of protection, loyalty, and secrecy that defies the simplicity of recorded history. Moreover, Dagobert's life highlights the intersection of political intrigue and spiritual authority. As a Merovingian, his claim to the throne was not merely hereditary, it was sacred. The very notion of divine kingship meant that his bloodline was dangerous to those who sought to monopolize power. His potential survival, hidden in plain sight, represents a challenge to the narrative imposed by the church and rival dynasties. It is a story of subversion, where the true heirs of sacred kingship persist quietly, shaping the world in ways that remain largely unseen. Ultimately, the story of Dagobert II is both cautionary and inspiring. It reveals the lengths to which a dynasty would go to preserve its lineage, the subtle strategies employed to protect sacred inheritance, and the enduring mystery that surrounds the Merovingians. His life and death, whether entirely historical or partially legendary, serve as a bridge between the well-documented early rulers and the whispered tales of hidden heirs, secret bloodlines, and clandestine guardians. Dagobert II reminds us that history is never as straightforward as it appears, that power can survive in the shadows, and that sometimes the most important stories are the ones deliberately concealed, waiting for those willing to listen, observe, and question the record. In tracing Dagobert's journey, we begin to see the larger picture of Merovingian survival, the quiet defiance against erasure, and the intricate layers of secrecy that have kept the sacred bloodline alive. It is a story that unfolds slowly, through whispers, obscure documents, and legends, revealing the extraordinary measures taken to ensure that the legacy of a dynasty could endure even in exile. Dagobert II, the king who may have survived his own assassination, stands as a symbol of resilience, secrecy, and the persistent power of a lineage that history tried, and perhaps failed, to erase. As the centuries unfolded, the Merovingian bloodline faced threats that went far beyond the battlefield. Political rivals, the ambitions of emerging dynasties, and the growing influence of the church all sought to suppress the sacred line, erasing it from memory. Yet legends persist that this sacred lineage did not simply vanish into obscurity. Instead, it was protected, guided, and hidden by a secretive network that became known as the Priory of Shaun. Though mainstream historians often dismiss the priory as myth or later invention, a closer examination suggests that it may have served as a medieval custodial order, tasked with safeguarding the bloodline, its knowledge, and the symbols of its authority across generations. The origins of the priory are difficult to trace, wrapped in the fog of legend and historical ambiguity. Some sources suggest that it was founded during the late Middle Ages by loyalists who feared for the survival of Merovingian heirs, while others hint at even older roots, possibly tied to earlier secret societies that existed to protect sacred knowledge and sacred bloodlines. Its members were said to include monks, knights, and scholars who recognized the importance of preserving what the public, and even many elites, had been taught to forget. They operated in secrecy, carefully concealing the identities of heirs, safeguarding artifacts, and ensuring that knowledge of the lineage and its significance would endure beyond the reach of political suppression. The priory's mission was as much symbolic as practical. They were custodians of a sacred story, a narrative that connected earthly rule to divine sanction, that linked ritual, blood, and ancestry in ways that were rarely recorded openly. Their work was subtle, concealed within monasteries, abbeys, and the libraries of Europe. Texts were copied with care, symbols hidden in art and architecture, and messages encoded in genealogical records. In many ways, the priory acted as both guardian and archivist, maintaining continuity of the Merovingian line even as the kings themselves were eclipsed or erased from history. Every hidden manuscript, every secret marker, was a testament to the resilience of a bloodline that had been declared extinct by public decree but survived quietly in the shadows. One of the most fascinating aspects of this custodial network is its emphasis on secrecy. The priory understood that visibility was dangerous. The very nature of sacred kingship made heirs targets for those who wished to consolidate power or rewrite history. For this reason, the organization was highly compartmentalized. Knowledge was shared only with those deemed trustworthy, and the identities of heirs were often obscured behind layers of deception, pseudonyms, and strategic marriages. In this way, the Merovingian line could continue, protected from those who sought to eliminate it, and yet remain influential, subtly guiding alliances and preserving its sacred inheritance through quiet stewardship rather than overt displays of power. The symbolism maintained by the priory extended beyond mere genealogical preservation. Art, architecture, and ritual all played a role in encoding the lineage's significance. Churches were constructed with hidden markers that referenced sacred bloodlines. Documents were illustrated with bees and other symbols associated with the Merovingians, and local legends were carefully cultivated to ensure continuity of memory. Each of these acts was deliberate, a method of keeping the essence of the dynasty alive in ways that could survive centuries of suppression. Through these measures, the priory acted as both protector and teacher, guiding those who understood the codes, and ensuring that the Merovingian legacy could persist even in the absence of public acknowledgement. The interplay between secrecy and symbolism is crucial to understanding the priory's function. To the outside world, these custodians may have appeared as monks, scholars, or minor nobility, roles that attracted little suspicion and allowed them to operate effectively under the radar. Yet beneath this veneer, they preserved knowledge of ritual, sacred inheritance, and ancestral authority that could be passed to the right heirs at the right time. In this sense, the priory was more than a secret society. It was a living repository of power, memory, and mysticism, an invisible thread connecting the scattered fragments of a lineage that history sought to erase. The existence of the priory also underscores the persistence of alternative power structures in medieval Europe. While kings, bishops, and emperors engaged in open contests for control, the priory worked quietly in the shadows, maintaining continuity where public authority had failed or been dismantled. Their methods may have been subtle, encoded manuscripts, hidden symbols, and discreet mentorship, but the outcome was profound. The Merovingian bloodline endured, surviving not by armies or conquest, but through careful stewardship, secrecy, and loyalty. This quiet resilience challenges conventional narratives of power and invites a reconsideration of what it means to wield influence in a historical context. Legends surrounding the priory often intersect with tales of hidden treasures, sacred relics, and cryptic documents. Some accounts suggest that the organization held secret knowledge of the Holy Grail, of sacred objects tied to the bloodline, or of rituals that maintain the dynasty's mystical authority. While such claims are difficult to substantiate, they highlight a recurring theme. The line between legend, ritual, and historical reality is deliberately blurred. The priory, as a guardian of these mysteries, operated in a space where secrecy was survival, and preservation of knowledge was the ultimate act of defiance against erasure. Even in modern times, whispers of the priory's influence persist, suggesting that their legacy may not have vanished entirely. References in obscure texts, symbols in medieval architecture, and genealogical anomalies hint at a network of guardians who may have ensured the survival of Merovingian descendants far beyond the medieval period. This enduring presence reinforces the notion that the Merovingian line, though politically eclipsed, was never truly extinguished. Instead, it continued quietly, carefully, and invisibly, guided by the invisible hands of custodians who understood the profound significance of what they protected. Through this lens, the story of the Priory of Chaon is inseparable from the broader narrative of Merovingian survival. It reveals a dynasty that did not simply vanish, but adapted, concealed, and endured through networks of loyalty, secrecy, and ritual. The priory's work is a testament to the resilience of sacred lineages, the power of symbols, and the extraordinary measures taken to preserve what the world was told to forget. Their story invites us to look beyond official chronicles, to read between the lines, and to consider that true authority often operates in shadow, invisible yet profoundly influential, ensuring that the legacy of the Merovingians could survive centuries of suppression and manipulation. The Merovingians left behind more than stories of kings and queens. They left traces, subtle yet enduring, in the form of artifacts, symbols, and hidden markers that whispered of their sacred power long after their political authority had faded. Unlike the monumental architecture of later dynasties or the detailed chronicles of kings whose lives were meticulously recorded, the remnants of the Merovingian line are often small, cryptic, and easily overlooked. A carved bee, an ornate comb, a hidden inscription, these objects were never mere decoration. They were tools of continuity, symbols of identity, and vessels of a power that the church and rival dynasties sought to suppress. Each artifact carries with it a story, a fragment of a legacy deliberately obscured by history, yet alive for those who know how to read it. Among the most enduring symbols of the Merovingians are the bees, meticulously engraved on tombs, jewelry, and ceremonial objects. To the casual observer, a bee might seem an innocuous motif, decorative, and meaningless. Yet in the language of the dynasty, it conveyed profound significance. Bees were associated with immortality, resurrection, and the divine right to rule. They were emblems of the king's sacred authority, a visual shorthand that communicated legitimacy without words. The careful placement of these symbols in private and public spaces ensured that the dynasty's presence remained subtly encoded in the landscape, even as chroniclers worked to erase their names from official records. Each bee was a silent guardian of the bloodline, a reminder that sacred power could persist in the smallest of forms. Other artifacts, such as combs, rings, and ceremonial weapons, were more than functional objects. They were conduits of ritual significance. Long before the modern fascination with relics, the Merovingians understood the importance of tangible symbols to reinforce authority. Combs, for example, were not merely for grooming. They were used in ceremonies where the sacred long hair of kings was anointed, braided, or prepared for public presentation. Rings often contained inscriptions or secret codes, marking ownership, lineage, or even mystical instruction. These objects were imbued with meaning, serving as links between the present and the sacred past, between mortal rulers and their divine mandate. To possess such an item was to hold a fragment of authority, a tangible connection to a line that many sought to erase. Some historians and alternative researchers point to hidden inscriptions and cryptic markers in Merovingian churches, abbeys, and even remote chapels as evidence of an enduring secret. These markings, often overlooked by mainstream scholars, suggest deliberate attempts to preserve knowledge, lineage, and sacred symbolism. Stone carvings, mosaics, and architectural details were sometimes encoded with messages readable only by those who understood the dynasty's secret language. In this way, even as the Merovingians' political power waned, the very landscape became a repository of hidden information, a mnemonic device that ensured the continuity of memory and sacred authority across generations. The question of hidden burial sites further deepens the intrigue. While many Merovingian kings and queens were interred in known abbeys or cathedrals, legends speak of secret graves, concealed chapels, and crypts lost to time. These sites were reportedly chosen for their spiritual significance, their protection from desecration, and their capacity to safeguard sacred relics associated with the bloodline. Some accounts suggest that the priory of Shaun or other loyalist factions may have played a role in hiding or relocating these remains, preserving not only the physical bodies but the mystical aura associated with their sacred lineage. The secrecy surrounding these tombs ensures that the artifacts, inscriptions, and symbols connected to the dynasty retain an air of mystery and a direct connection to the sacred authority they once embodied. Certain manuscripts and illuminated texts also played a role in preserving the Merovingian legacy. Unlike ordinary chronicles, these documents were often deliberately coded, blending genealogy, symbolism, and ritual instruction. They may have contained genealogical charts, prophetic verses, or instructions for maintaining the sacred lineage. Hidden within their pages were references to bloodlines, symbolic interpretations of artifacts, and guidance on safeguarding the dynasty's influence. To the untrained eye, they were merely devotional or historical texts, yet to those initiated into the Merovingian mysteries, they were roadmaps to understanding and preserving sacred power across generations. The use of symbolism in art and architecture extended beyond visual cues. It was often a language of secrecy. Figures, animals, and geometric patterns encoded meaning accessible only to the initiated. A lion might signify courage, a bee divine authority, or a particular arrangement of stones the presence of hidden heirs. Even the orientation of buildings, the placement of altars, or the alignment of windows may have carried ritual significance, linking sacred space to the dynastic bloodline. This careful encoding ensured that the Merovingians' influence persisted quietly, guiding perception and memory, even when their names have been erased from official chronicles. One of the most compelling aspects of these artifacts and hidden markers is their dual function. They served both as symbols for the initiated and as a shield against those who sought to erase the dynasty. To ordinary observers, they were art, decoration, or ritual items. To those in the know, they were keys, tools, and conduits for continuity. This duality reflects the sophisticated understanding the Merovingians had of power, perception, and memory. Authority, after all, is as much about what is remembered and perceived as it is about armies or decrees. By embedding their legacy in subtle artifacts and coded symbols, the Merovingians ensured that their influence would survive long after public records attempted to consign them to oblivion. Even in the modern era, traces of these markers can be found, waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to look beyond surface appearances. From obscure tombs to hidden manuscripts, from architectural symbols to personal artifacts, the remnants of the Merovingians continued to speak to a world that has long been told their story is over. They serve as a reminder that history is not always what it seems, that authority can endure in hidden forms, and that the sacred line of kings once thought erased may yet be traced through these enduring symbols of power. In contemplating these artifacts, we are invited to see the Merovingians not just as a dynasty of kings and queens, but as a sophisticated network of symbolism, ritual, and secrecy. Their influence persists in objects and spaces carefully designed to survive erasure, ensuring that the sacred line, though hidden, remains alive in memory, story, and symbol. The bees, the combs, the inscriptions, and the secret markers are more than relics. They're silent witnesses to a legacy that defied obliteration, a testament to the ingenuity, foresight, and enduring power of a dynasty determined to survive beyond the reach of history itself. The Merovingians were not only masters of bloodline and ritual, they were also closely tied to prophecy, esoteric knowledge, and hidden texts that promised to reveal the fate of kings, the destiny of nations, and the secret power of their own lineage. While the kings themselves were often portrayed in chronicles as earthly rulers, hints in obscure manuscripts suggest they were initiates into a body of knowledge that extended beyond the mundane concerns of war, politics, and governance. The written records, now fragmentary and often hidden, hint at a deep intertwining of genealogy, divination, and sacred authority, preserved carefully by those who understood its significance and safeguarded by networks like the Priory of Shaun. Among the most intriguing sources are prophetic texts that mention kings anointed by heaven, rulers whose bloodlines were said to carry divine favor. These prophecies were not general. They were coded, precise, and often accessible only to those who could interpret their symbolism. Some chronicles suggest that the Merovingians had access to such prophecies, guiding the decisions of kings and queens alike, providing a framework for understanding events both on the battlefield and in the courts of power. The existence of these prophecies, obscure and sometimes deliberately ambiguous, added another layer of sacred authority to the bloodline, reinforcing the idea that their kingship was ordained not only by earthly forces, but by divine foresight. Secret texts, sometimes referred to in legends as codices, manuscripts, or scrolls, were carefully guarded within abbeys, private libraries, or even hidden caches across Europe. These texts may have contained genealogical charts linking the Merovingians to earlier sacred or legendary lines, interpretations of celestial signs, or instructions for ritual acts designed to maintain the potency of the bloodline. The mere possession of such knowledge and the ability to interpret it correctly was a form of power in itself. It is easy to understand why rival dynasties and ecclesiastical authorities might have sought to suppress, destroy, or misinterpret these documents, as they threatened the very notion that authority was solely derived from political maneuvering or the church's approval. The intertwining of prophecy with lineage also appears in the legends surrounding the survival of Dagobert II and other hidden heirs. Some texts hint that certain kings and queens were foreseen to survive exile, assassination, or political suppression, their descendants destined to maintain sacred continuity even in secret. These predictions were often encoded in obscure allegories, allegorical figures, or symbolic genealogies. For example, rivers, forests, or specific sites were sometimes referenced in ways that seem cryptic to the casual reader, but which may have indicated safe havens or ritual sites for hidden heirs. The use of prophecy in this way reinforces the idea that the Merovingians' authority was not merely political, but entwined with destiny, foresight, and the manipulation of historical memory. Esoteric knowledge also extended into numerology, symbolism, and sacred geometry, often embedded in manuscripts, architecture, and ritual practice. Numbers were never accidental. They conveyed hidden truths about lineage, cycles of power, and divine sanction. Symbols, from bees to geometric patterns, were part of a visual language that communicated sacred authority across generations. This body of knowledge was rarely recorded openly. It was encoded, carefully transmitted, and understood only by those trained in the mysteries of the dynasty. The result was a system in which authority, destiny, and sacred inheritance were inseparable, communicated through hidden texts, rituals, and symbols that shaped both perception and memory. The role of these hidden texts was not purely abstract. They guided practical decisions, from the preservation of heirs to the arrangement of alliances, the selection of queens, and the ritualization of kingship. Every act of governance, ceremonial gesture, or alliance could carry coded significance, reflecting knowledge derived from these sacred writings. It is easy to see how such guidance would be invaluable to a dynasty under constant threat, and why those outside the inner circle might dismiss the Merovingians as eccentric, mystical, or even heretical. What appeared as superstition may have been a deliberate system of preserving authority, foresight, and continuity under conditions of extreme vulnerability. Legends surrounding prophetic texts also intersect with ideas of sacred relics and the Holy Grail, though interpretations vary. Some suggest that certain relics were linked to the bloodline's mystical power, their presence reinforcing the authority of kings and queens. Prophecies often reference these objects in cryptic ways, suggesting that knowledge of sacred relics, combined with understanding of celestial or ritual signs, was key to maintaining the potency of the line. Whether these connections are literal or symbolic, they indicate a profound belief that the sacred Merovingian bloodline was intertwined with cosmic and spiritual forces, and that hidden knowledge was essential to its survival and influence. Even today, traces of these texts and prophecies can be found in obscure manuscripts, overlooked libraries, and encrypted symbols embedded in historical sites. Scholars, cryptographers, and enthusiasts have long debated their authenticity and meaning. Yet the persistence of these artifacts suggests that they were more than fanciful inventions. They represent a worldview in which kingship, destiny, and divine authority were inseparable, and where the continuity of a sacred lineage depended on secrecy, ritual, and knowledge carefully protected from public scrutiny. The study of these texts invites a radical reconsideration of history. It suggests that the Merovingians were not merely early medieval rulers, but custodians of a sacred knowledge system, blending prophecy, ritual, and lineage preservation. Their authority was derived not only from conquest or politics, but from an understanding of hidden truths, a mastery of symbolism, and the careful stewardship of sacred knowledge. In this sense, the Merovingian dynasty becomes more than a historical curiosity. It becomes a lens through which we can view the subtle interplay of power, secrecy, and destiny in medieval Europe. By exploring the prophecies, secret texts, and hidden knowledge of the Merovingians, we begin to see a pattern emerge. A dynasty whose kings and queens, custodians, and initiates worked across generations to protect not only bloodlines, but the very idea of sacred authority itself. The texts, though often fragmentary or obscured, provide a roadmap to understanding the persistence of the Merovingian legacy. They reveal a line of thought in which survival, secrecy, and esoteric wisdom are inseparable from rulership, and in which the hidden knowledge of the past continues to whisper, waiting for those willing to decipher its messages. As the Merovingians' sacred line endured, their existence increasingly became a threat to the ambitions of rival dynasties and the growing power of the Church. The very concept of kings whose authority derived not only from political might, but from sacred blood, ritual, and prophetic knowledge challenged emerging power structures. Over time, this tension gave rise to systematic efforts to suppress, erase, and rewrite the history of the Merovingians, transforming them from rulers into myths, and their legacy from a living force into whispers buried in obscure manuscripts and coded symbols. The rewriting of history began subtly. Chroniclers, often aligned with the new Carolingian rulers or the church hierarchy, minimized the achievements of the Merovingians, portraying them as weak, decadent, or even mad. Stories were edited, genealogies altered, and ceremonial practices dismissed as superstition or foolishness. The sacred hair, once a visible emblem of authority, became a subject of ridicule. Queens who preserved the bloodline were rendered invisible. Prophetic texts were ignored or suppressed. Every alteration served a single purpose: to delegitimize a line of kings whose authority threatened to undermine the narratives favored by those in power. The Merovingians, once celebrated for their divine sanction, were transformed into cautionary tales of folly and decline. Suppression was not limited to written records. Ritual practices, sacred relics, and symbolic artifacts were deliberately hidden, destroyed, or reinterpreted to remove their connection to the sacred bloodline. Churches that once honored Merovingian kings were repurposed, abbeys that safeguarded secret texts were restructured, and symbols such as bees or cryptic inscriptions were obscured under layers of new iconography. The Priory of Chaon, or other loyalist networks, may have acted to preserve fragments of this knowledge, but the larger effort to control memory and perception was relentless. To understand this suppression is to understand that history is often not merely what happened, but what those in power want us to believe happened. Political motives were entwined with spiritual and cultural objectives. The Carolingians, seeking to consolidate power, required a narrative in which they alone held legitimate authority. By diminishing the Merovingians, they created a precedent that authority could be centralized, hereditary bloodlines could be replaced, and sacred kingship could be reinterpreted under the auspices of the Church. This recontextualization of history ensured that future generations would see the Merovingians as a fading dynasty, a curious anomaly, rather than a lineage whose influence persisted in hidden ways. The careful orchestration of memory, coupled with the control of chroniclers and clerics, was as effective a tool of domination as armies or taxation. The suppression of Merovingian history also extended to geography and genealogy. Towns, abbeys, and relics once associated with the dynasty were renamed, relocated, or repurposed. Lineages that could trace descent from Merovingian heirs were often obscured through marriage alliances or deliberate omission from records. This form of historical erasure was meticulous, subtle, and devastatingly effective, turning living memory into legend and myth. What remained was often contradictory, fragmentary, or coded, leaving modern historians and enthusiasts piecing together a puzzle intentionally designed to conceal its picture. Yet, despite these systematic efforts, the Merovingians' legacy proved remarkably resilient. The symbols, artifacts, and coded manuscripts preserved fragments of knowledge, and oral traditions carried stories that refused to disappear entirely. Local legends of hidden heirs, secret relics, and divine kingship survived in the folklore of villages, monasteries, and noble families. Even in exile or obscurity, loyalist factions ensured that the essence of the bloodline endured, protected from those who sought its complete erasure. History, in this sense, becomes a dialogue between suppression and persistence, between official narratives and hidden truths, revealing the extraordinary lengths to which dynasties will go to protect both blood and memory. The very contradictions in historical accounts hint at the success of these clandestine efforts. Where records exist, they are often incomplete, contradictory, or deliberately ambiguous. Kings appear and disappear, queens are named then omitted, and key events are glossed over. These inconsistencies are not necessarily failures of recording. They may be deliberate acts of concealment, a reflection of the ongoing struggle between suppression and preservation. By examining these gaps and anomalies, we begin to understand the Merovingians not only as rulers, but as participants in a long-term strategy of survival, operating in the shadows even as their public presence was erased. The suppression also created fertile ground for myth-making. As the dynasty faded from official memory, its symbols, rituals, and hidden knowledge became the stuff of legend. Prophecies were interpreted after the fact, relics were imbued with new meaning, and secret societies claimed to inherit the mantle of the bloodline. While some of these stories are undoubtedly embellishment, the persistence of coherent motifs, sacred hair, hidden heirs, symbolic artifacts, suggests a foundation in historical truth. The suppression of history, paradoxically, ensured the survival of the Merovingian narrative, albeit in a more enigmatic, coded, and conspiratorial form. Through this lens, the study of the Merovingians becomes a study of power itself. Not merely political or military power, but the power to shape memory, perception, and belief. The deliberate erasure of a dynasty illustrates how authority is contested not only in the present, but in the past, in chronicles, manuscripts, and monuments. By understanding the mechanisms of suppression, we gain insight into the resilience of sacred bloodlines, the ingenuity of those who protect them, and the intricate interplay between history, memory, and secrecy. Ultimately, the story of suppression is inseparable from the story of survival. The Merovingians were targeted precisely because they represented continuity, sacred authority, and a challenge to emerging power structures. Yet despite these efforts, fragments endured. Artifacts, coded texts, hidden genealogies, and oral traditions all ensured that the essence of the dynasty remained. To study the suppression is to see the stakes of power and the determination required to erase what is deemed dangerous, while also revealing the extraordinary measures taken by those who sought to preserve a sacred legacy for generations yet to come. The lesson of this suppression is clear. History is never neutral. It is a battlefield in which truth, perception, and memory are contested. The Merovingians, once kings of France, became ghosts in the official record, yet their legacy persists in symbols, rituals, artifacts, and the whispers of hidden texts. Their story teaches us that what survives is often only a fraction of what once was, and that the most profound power may reside not in armies or crowns, but in the ability to endure, to persist, and to survive the relentless tides of suppression. Centuries after the Merovingians were officially erased from the chronicles of kings, a quiet fascination began to resurface among scholars, antiquarians, and those attuned to the hidden currents of history. The resurgence of interest in the sacred bloodline did not emerge overnight. It arrived as fragments, obscure manuscripts rediscovered in libraries, overlooked tombs cataloged by local historians, and whispers of forgotten rituals preserved in regional folklore. The pursuit of these traces sparked what could be called a modern investigation into the survival and influence of the Merovingians, a search for answers that ordinary history had long refused to provide. Modern researchers began piecing together a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered across time. Genealogical studies revealed unexpected continuities in noble families, suggesting connections to the Merovingian line that had been carefully concealed. Art historians identified recurring symbols in medieval churches, bees, geometric patterns, and obscure inscriptions that echoed the visual language of the dynasty. Scholars examining illuminated manuscripts noticed hidden codes, allegorical references, and genealogical charts that hinted at knowledge preserved deliberately outside mainstream historical awareness. Each discovery, while modest in isolation, contributed to a growing recognition that the Merovingians' influence had survived quietly and deliberately beyond their supposed extinction. The role of secret societies in the modern era further deepened the intrigue. Some researchers speculate that organizations claiming descent from the Priory of Chaon or inspired by its traditions were part of an unbroken line of custodianship. While the existence of such groups is often shrouded in controversy, the persistence of coded messages, symbolic artifacts, and obscure genealogical records suggests that modern interest may not simply be academic curiosity. It could represent the continuation of an ongoing effort to preserve knowledge of the sacred line, to maintain awareness of its significance, and to ensure that the lessons of history are not entirely forgotten. The boundaries between myth, legend, and historical fact blur in these investigations, yet they reveal the enduring potency of the Merovingian legacy. Archaeological discoveries also played a role in rekindling fascination with the bloodline. Excavations of medieval abbeys, crypts, and noble estates occasionally uncovered artifacts whose design, materials, or symbolic motifs were unmistakably tied to the Merovingians. Sacred combs, rings, ceremonial objects, and remnants of inscriptions provided physical proof that the dynasty's influence had been tangible, encoded in objects intended to survive suppression. These relics, when studied carefully, often revealed layers of meaning invisible to earlier generations, offering insights into the complex interplay between ritual, lineage, and power. The artifacts served as keys to unlock mysteries that had been deliberately obscured for centuries. Prophecies and esoteric texts, once hidden in monasteries or private collections, began to resurface, often accompanied by scholarly debate over their authenticity and interpretation. Some manuscripts suggested that descendants of the Merovingians might still exist, quietly living among European nobility or within lineages obscured by time and political maneuvering. Allegorical interpretations linked these figures to broader historical events, from the Crusades to revolutions, suggesting that the influence of the bloodline might have been subtle but persistent. These revelations challenged conventional narratives, hinting at a network of continuity, guardianship, and hidden influence that had persisted far longer than most historians had imagined. The resurgence of interest also sparked reinterpretations of symbolic artifacts. Scholars began identifying the Merovingian motif not as mere decoration, but as a marker of sacred authority, encoded messages, and continuity of lineage. Architectural elements, such as the alignment of churches, crypts, and ceremonial spaces, were studied with new attention to their potential symbolic and ritual significance. Even minor artifacts, such as jewelry or manuscript illuminations, were re-examined for hidden meaning, revealing an intricate web of symbolism and continuity that had been deliberately obscured. Each discovery, subtle or monumental, reinforced the idea that the sacred bloodline had left enduring traces for those willing to look. Media and literature have also played a role in bringing these discoveries to wider attention. Books, documentaries, and investigative reports have explored the hidden history of the Merovingians, weaving together archaeology, genealogy, esotericism, and legend. While some of these accounts are speculative, they share a common theme. The line between myth and history is deliberately blurred, and the survival of sacred bloodlines is often hidden in plain sight. The modern revival of interest is therefore both an academic pursuit and a cultural phenomenon, reflecting the enduring allure of a dynasty that once claimed divine sanction and whose influence may still resonate today. One of the most compelling aspects of modern investigation is the sense of continuity it provides. Researchers, historians, and enthusiasts are not merely uncovering forgotten facts. They are participating, whether knowingly or not, in a centuries-long process of preservation and interpretation. Each artifact analyzed, manuscript decoded, or genealogical connection traced becomes part of an ongoing dialogue with the past, a dialogue that echoes the methods of medieval custodians who sought to protect the sacred bloodline. In this way, modern investigations connect directly to the survival strategies employed by the Merovingians themselves, continuing the work of discovery and preservation across time. Ultimately, the modern exploration of the Merovingian legacy reveals more than history. It uncovers the principles by which influence, power, and memory persist. The dynasty's sacred authority, once suppressed and obscured, now emerges through meticulous scholarship, careful observation, and the patient unraveling of hidden clues. By tracing the lines of blood, symbolism, and prophecy, contemporary researchers uncover not just the story of a dynasty, but the enduring strategies by which knowledge and power survive attempts at erasure. The Merovingians, in this light, become more than a historical curiosity. They are a lens through which we can understand the resilience of lineage, secrecy, and sacred authority across the centuries. The modern investigations into the Merovingians remind us that history is never static. It is a living process shaped not only by what is written, but by what is hidden, preserved, and rediscovered. The sacred bloodline, once declared extinct, continues to inspire discovery, speculation, and fascination, proving that even in silence and obscurity, influence can endure. Each artifact, manuscript, and genealogical trace is a testament to a lineage that has defied time, secrecy, and suppression, and that continues to challenge our understanding of what it means to survive in the shadows of history. The survival of the Merovingian bloodline did not end with secret manuscripts or hidden relics. It extended quietly into the structures of European dynasties, the webs of noble alliances, and the hidden corridors of power. While the Merovingians themselves faded from political prominence, their lineage, preserved through strategic marriages, secret alliances, and loyalist factions, may have influenced the trajectory of European nobility for centuries. These connections are subtle, often obscured by time and deliberate suppression, yet the patterns that emerge suggest a continuity of influence that stretches far beyond the borders of early medieval Francia. Genealogical research hints at surprising intersections between Merovingian descendants and various noble houses across Europe. Royal and noble families of France, Germany, and even England contain lineages that could plausibly trace back to the sacred Merovingian line, though records are frequently fragmentary, altered, or deliberately obscured. This web of descent would have allowed the bloodline to survive in secret, embedded within established dynasties that could provide both protection and political influence. By remaining in the shadows, the line could continue without drawing the attention of those who might seek to extinguish it, preserving both heritage and authority through the centuries. The influence of the Merovingians may also have extended into secret societies and esoteric orders that claim historical or spiritual continuity. While modern skepticism often dismisses such claims, the persistence of symbolic motifs, coded genealogies, and recurring ritualistic elements suggest that there may be more than coincidence at work. Groups devoted to preserving sacred knowledge, ritual practices, or genealogical secrets could have acted as intermediaries, maintaining awareness of the bloodline, guiding heirs, and safeguarding artifacts. Through these clandestine networks, the essence of Merovingian power could be maintained even as public authority disappeared. Symbolism, once a tool for communication in medieval times, continued to serve as a marker of identity and continuity in later centuries. Heraldic motifs, ceremonial practices, and secret markers embedded in estates or religious institutions often reflected knowledge of the sacred bloodline. Bees, geometric patterns, and cryptic symbols reappeared subtly, signaling allegiance to tradition, continuity of ancestry, or membership in custodial networks. These signals would have been recognizable only to the initiated, allowing the line to persist while remaining invisible to the casual observer or the broader historical record. It is a testament to the ingenuity of the Merovingians and their custodians that their influence could persist through such indirect yet deliberate means. The interweaving of the Merovingian bloodline with European nobility also highlights the dynastic strategies employed to preserve both survival and secrecy. Marriages, alliances, and inheritances were carefully arranged to conceal the sacred lineage, embedding it within families whose public prominence could shield it from scrutiny. In some cases, descendants may have been placed in positions of influence while their true ancestry remained hidden, allowing them to shape political, religious, or social events without attracting attention. The strategic placement of heirs ensured that the sacred line endured, quietly influencing the course of European history from behind a veil of anonymity. Beyond individual lineages, the influence of the Merovingians may have shaped broader cultural and institutional developments. Religious institutions, especially monasteries and abbeys with ties to the dynasty, may have functioned as centers for preservation of knowledge, ritual, and genealogical memory. Some orders could have maintained hidden archives, protected artifacts, and transmitted symbolic wisdom to those deemed worthy. This interplay between lineage, ritual, and institutional authority suggests a sophisticated understanding of influence, one that did not rely solely on crowns or armies, but on continuity discretion, and the careful cultivation of memory. Historical records occasionally hint at extraordinary measures taken to ensure continuity. Legends of hidden heirs, relocated relics, and secret marriages imply that the preservation of the Merovingian bloodline required vigilance, subtlety, and a network of loyal custodians. Even when dynastic power shifted publicly, the sacred lineage could persist quietly within the nobility, ensuring that its influence remained alive in ways that were deliberately obscured from historians and chroniclers. The very act of surviving unnoticed, embedded in other families, illustrates the extraordinary foresight and planning of those who sought to protect the dynasty's essence. The intersection of bloodline, symbolism, and secrecy also contributed to the mystique that surrounds the Merovingians today. Scholars and investigators note recurring motifs across centuries, suggesting a continuity of knowledge and purpose that transcends the public narrative. Whether in heraldry, architecture, or ritual, traces of the sacred bloodline emerge in unexpected places, indicating that the influence of the Merovingians did not vanish but was carefully guided, hidden, and preserved. These signals, often subtle and easily overlooked, serve as a living testament to a dynasty that operated in the shadows, maintaining relevance without overt recognition. Modern interest in these patterns often intersects with the study of secret societies, from medieval orders to esoteric organizations claiming connection to historical custodians. While verification is challenging, the recurrence of symbolism, ritual, and genealogical continuity suggests that these networks may represent a deliberate effort to preserve knowledge of the sacred bloodline. By guiding members, influencing social and political decisions subtly, and safeguarding artifacts and texts, these custodians may have perpetuated the legacy of the Merovingians across centuries, illustrating the enduring power of influence when exercised quietly and strategically. The survival of the Merovingian line through European dynasties is more than an academic curiosity. It reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of power. Authority is not merely the ability to rule openly, but the capacity to endure, to influence events indirectly, and to protect knowledge across generations. The Merovingians, through marriages, alliances, symbolism, and custodial networks, demonstrate that true influence often lies not in visibility, but in continuity. Their story challenges conventional understandings of history, revealing the subtle mechanisms through which sacred bloodlines and hidden knowledge can persist despite suppression, political upheaval, and the passage of centuries. By tracing these influences, we begin to see the Merovingians not as a dynasty erased by history, but as a lineage that adapted, concealed, and persisted. Their bloodline, safeguarded through generations of strategic marriages, symbolic communication, and clandestine custodianship, became a hidden thread weaving through the tapestry of European nobility. The patterns, motifs, and alliances that survive today are more than relics. They are evidence of a dynasty that understood the value of secrecy, the importance of symbolism, and the enduring power of lineage. Even in apparent obscurity, the Merovingians left an imprint on European dynasties that continues to intrigue, inspire, and mystify. As the Merovingian bloodline persisted quietly through centuries, legends and myths began to grow around it, both preserving and distorting its history. The line between fact and fiction blurred, creating a rich tapestry of stories that captivated scholars, storytellers, and the curious alike. These myths were not accidental. They were born from the combination of deliberate secrecy, extraordinary survival, and the human fascination with what is hidden. Over time, the Merovingians became more than historical figures. They became symbols, their legacy infused with mystery, prophecy, and the aura of sacred authority. One of the most enduring legends revolves around the so-called long-haired kings. The sacred hair of the Merovingian monarchs was more than a personal attribute. It symbolized divine authority and the mystical power of their bloodline. Tales of hidden hairs, carefully preserved and guarded, suggest that even after the fall of their political power, these relics were used in ceremonies to maintain continuity of a line. Over generations, stories emerged that these hairs carried mystical potency, capable of legitimizing rulers or providing a tangible link to sacred ancestry. The combination of secrecy, sacredness, and ritual gave rise to a mystique that transcended mere history and entered the realm of legend. Another prominent myth involves the hidden heirs of the dynasty. Legends tell of children spirited away from the public eye, raised in secrecy to ensure the survival of the sacred bloodline. Some were said to have been hidden in monasteries, remote estates, or even foreign courts, their identities known only to a select few. These tales, while difficult to verify historically, reflect a profound truth about the lengths to which the Merovingians' loyalists would go to preserve continuity. The idea of heirs living in shadow, unseen by the world but carrying the authority of kings, captures the imagination and contributes to the sense of an enduring, almost eternal dynasty. The association of the Merovingians with mystical relics and the Holy Grail further fueled the myths. Stories of sacred objects, carefully guarded and imbued with symbolic power, suggested that the bloodline was not only royal but also divinely sanctioned. While concrete evidence of such relics is scarce, the persistence of these narratives in folklore, medieval texts, and modern speculation indicates their powerful role in shaping perception. The sacred relics became symbols of hidden knowledge, connecting the physical and spiritual dimensions of the dynasty, and reinforcing the idea that the Merovingians' influence extended beyond what was visible in the public record. Prophecies and coded manuscripts also played a significant role in myth-making. Esoteric texts, often fragmentary or cryptic, were interpreted as foretelling the survival of the Merovingian line, the rise and fall of rulers, or the hidden hand of sacred authority in world events. While interpretations vary and many are speculative, these prophecies contributed to a narrative in which the Merovingians were more than kings. They were participants in a larger cosmic design, guided by destiny, ritual, and secret knowledge. The blending of prophecy with history created a mythos in which the past, present, and future were intertwined, and where the bloodline's influence could never be fully erased. The fascination with Merovingian myths extends into modern culture. Books, documentaries, and popular media have explored these legends, often highlighting hidden bloodlines, secret societies, and the Grail's mystical connection. While such portrayals frequently mix fact and fiction, they underscore the enduring allure of the dynasty. Audiences are drawn to the idea of hidden knowledge, sacred authority, and a lineage that operates behind the veil of recorded history. The myths function as both entertainment and a form of cultural memory, preserving fragments of a suppressed narrative while expanding the imagination around what the Merovingians represented. Some myths even suggest that the Merovingians' influence continues subtly in contemporary events. Symbolic references, recurring motifs, and genealogical anomalies are cited as evidence that the line's presence has not entirely disappeared. Whether in noble families, ceremonial traditions, or esoteric circles, the idea persists that the sacred bloodline leaves traces, often hidden but occasionally detectable to those who know where and how to look. These modern myths echo the historical strategies of concealment, highlighting the enduring relevance of secrecy, lineage, and symbolic communication. Legends surrounding the Merovingians also explore the tension between visible power and hidden authority. They suggest that true influence does not always manifest in crowns or armies, but in continuity, ritual, and the subtle shaping of events from behind the scenes. This theme resonates through the myths. Kings may fall, dynasties may be replaced in public view, but the sacred line endures, quietly guiding the course of history. The myths capture the imagination precisely because they challenge conventional notions of power, suggesting that the most profound authority often operates unseen. The interplay of fact and legend also underscores a psychological dimension. Humans are drawn to the mysterious, the secret, and the forbidden. The Merovingians, deliberately obscured by suppression and secrecy, became the perfect canvas for such fascination. Every hidden artifact, coded manuscript, and whispered tale fueled speculation, ensuring that the dynasty remained alive in collective memory. Myths became a survival mechanism, preserving the essence of the bloodline and maintaining its significance long after the political reality had shifted. Ultimately, the legends and myths of the Merovingians serve as a bridge between history and imagination, fact and interpretation. They preserve a narrative of resilience, sacred authority, and hidden continuity that complements the historical record. While some elements may never be verified, the myths are powerful because they reflect enduring truths about secrecy, survival, and the human tendency to protect what is valued. Through these stories, the Merovingians continue to captivate, reminding us that even in apparent extinction, a dynasty can endure in memory, symbol, and legend. The fascination with these myths is not merely academic, it is visceral. It draws us into the shadows, inviting speculation, interpretation, and curiosity. It challenges us to look beyond official records, to notice symbols, and to consider the possibility that history is never entirely what it seems. Through legends and myths, the Merovingians live on, not just as a historical dynasty, but as an enduring emblem of sacred authority, secret knowledge, and the power of continuity, waiting to be discovered, interpreted, and understood by those willing to look deeper. In the modern era, the fascination with the Merovingian bloodline has evolved from historical curiosity and myth-making into a labyrinth of conspiracy theories, speculative scholarship, and clandestine intrigue. Unlike the medieval period, when suppression was deliberate and physical, contemporary attention operates in the realms of media, secret societies, and academic debates, creating a network of interpretations that blend fact, speculation, and imagination. Across books, documentaries, and online discourse, the Merovingians are frequently portrayed not just as a dynasty lost to history, but as a line whose hidden influence may extend into modern political, religious, and cultural spheres. At the heart of these modern theories lies the idea that the Merovingians were custodians of sacred knowledge, a mantle that could survive centuries if properly protected. This knowledge, often linked to the Holy Grail, secret rituals, and encoded genealogical records, is said to have been preserved through loyal factions or secret societies whose existence may extend to the present day. Whether these claims are literal or symbolic, they create a sense of continuity, suggesting that the bloodline's influence did not vanish with the decline of medieval power, but instead adapted to new forms, operating quietly in parallel with public authority. In this framework, conspiracy is less a fanciful story than a reflection of the enduring strategies the Merovingians themselves may have employed. One of the most widely discussed elements in modern conspiracies involves secret societies, both historical and contemporary, that allegedly claim custodianship of the Merovingian legacy. From the Priory of Chaon to speculative modern orders, these groups are thought to maintain genealogical records, safeguard artifacts, and preserve rituals connected to sacred bloodlines. Their purported influence extends to politics, finance, and religious institutions, though evidence is often circumstantial or encrypted in symbolic language. Whether factual or interpretive, these theories highlight a recurring theme: the idea that true power is often invisible, mediated through knowledge, secrecy, and the subtle manipulation of events across generations. The role of genealogical secrecy remains central to these theories. Many modern researchers posit that the Merovingian bloodline has survived quietly within European nobility, its presence obscured by marriage alliances, name changes, and careful concealment. Descendants, if they exist, may live without public recognition, carrying the symbolic and mystical legacy of the dynasty in private spheres. This idea resonates with medieval strategies of preservation, reflecting an extraordinary foresight in ensuring continuity through subtle channels rather than overt rule. Conspiracies thus merge historical practices with contemporary speculation, imagining a world in which the sacred bloodline quietly shapes events behind the scenes. Symbolism, once a tool of coded communication in medieval Europe, continues to play a role in modern intrigue. From heraldry and architectural motifs to ritual objects and literary references, researchers trace recurring patterns that suggest deliberate preservation of Merovingian influence. Bees, long hair, geometric patterns, and cryptic inscriptions appear repeatedly across centuries and locations, often serving as markers for those in the know. In contemporary conspiracy theory, these symbols are sometimes interpreted as evidence of hidden networks, guiding observers to connections invisible to mainstream understanding. The recurrence of motifs bridges history and theory, lending plausibility to ideas of ongoing influence while maintaining an air of mystery. The fascination with the Merovingians also intersects with religious and mystical speculation. Some theories suggest that the bloodline carries not only genealogical significance, but spiritual or cosmic authority, linking modern descendants to rituals, prophecies, or esoteric traditions. These interpretations draw on the historical association of the dynasty with sacred hair, divine kingship, and mystical relics, extending them into a narrative in which the sacred bloodline is a living conduit for hidden power. While such claims often reside at the edge of verifiable history, they capture the imagination, reinforcing the perception that the Merovingians' legacy is as much mystical as it is political. Modern media and literature have amplified these conspiracies, often blending documented history with speculative connections to create compelling narratives. From investigative books to documentaries and online platforms, the Merovingians are frequently depicted as the linchpin of secret knowledge, hidden influence, and esoteric continuity. While skepticism is warranted, the very persistence of these stories reflects the enduring appeal of the dynasty. They invite audiences to question what is known, to consider hidden forces shaping events, and to explore the delicate boundary between history and hidden narrative. The global dimension of modern conspiracy theory extends the reach of the Merovingian legacy. Some researchers argue that the influence of the sacred bloodline, through its purported custodians, may intersect with geopolitical, cultural, or financial networks in ways subtle enough to evade conventional scrutiny. While evidence is often indirect, recurring motifs, genealogical anomalies, and symbolic patterns suggest a worldview in which hidden authority can persist despite centuries of suppression. Conspiracies are thus a form of narrative archaeology, uncovering threads of continuity in a world that otherwise presents only fragmented or sanitized historical accounts. Even within scholarly inquiry, the Merovingians challenge assumptions about power, secrecy, and survival. Their story prompts questions about what is preserved, what is suppressed, and who decides which narratives dominate the historical record. By studying the bloodline through the lens of modern conspiracies, researchers confront the intersection of myth, memory, and authority, exploring how secrecy can be both a tool and a shield, and how narratives, whether true or speculative, shape our understanding of history itself. Ultimately, the fascination with Merovingian conspiracies underscores a human attraction to hidden knowledge, forbidden histories, and the unseen forces that shape the world. The dynasty becomes a symbol of endurance, secrecy, and subtle power, a reminder that the past is never entirely gone, and that influence can persist in forms invisible to the uninitiated. Whether through genealogical threads, symbolic motifs, or whispered tales, the Merovingians continue to captivate, illustrating that the legacy of sacred bloodlines is not merely a historical curiosity, but a lens through which we explore the nature of power, continuity, and the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of recorded history. The modern intrigue surrounding the Merovingians, then, is more than speculation. It is a continuation of centuries-long strategies of preservation and concealment. Conspiracies, artifacts, genealogical threads, and symbolic motifs all converge to suggest that the sacred bloodline is not merely a relic of the past, but an enduring influence hidden in plain sight, waiting to be traced, interpreted, and understood by those willing to navigate the shadows of history. The cultural impact of the Merovingian bloodline extends far beyond the dusty pages of medieval chronicles or the hidden manuscripts guarded by secret societies. Across centuries, their story has inspired literature, art, and even modern entertainment, feeding a fascination with kingship, mysticism, and hidden authority that continues to captivate imaginations. From the subtle symbols embedded in Gothic cathedrals to the sprawling narratives of contemporary books and films, the Merovingians have become more than a historical dynasty. They're a lens through which society explores secrecy, power, and the allure of what lies beneath the surface of recorded history. In literature, the Merovingians appear as enigmatic figures whose influence transcends their time. They are often depicted as the custodians of sacred knowledge, bearers of mystical power, or the source of hidden wisdom that challenges conventional understanding. Novels, historical fiction, and esoteric works draw on fragments of genealogy, legend, and prophecy to create characters whose presence evokes both awe and curiosity. These portrayals, while fictionalized, preserve essential aspects of the dynasty: the sense of hidden authority, the sacred lineage, and the ongoing tension between revelation and concealment. Through narrative, the bloodline persists, shaping the imagination of readers who may never encounter a medieval manuscript, but who are drawn to the enduring mystery of the Merovingians. The visual arts also reflect this fascination. Artists have long been inspired by the symbolism associated with the Merovingians, from sacred hair and bees to ceremonial regalia and architectural motifs. Paintings, sculptures, and illuminated works often incorporate subtle references to the dynasty, creating layers of meaning that speak to viewers attuned to symbolism. Even when the dynasty is not explicitly named, the recurrence of these motifs suggests an awareness of a sacred lineage whose influence transcends political or temporal boundaries. In this way, the Merovingians leave a lasting imprint on cultural memory, their story encoded in the visual language of art across centuries. Modern media, particularly documentaries and television series, have brought the Merovingian narrative to a global audience. Programs exploring hidden histories, secret societies, and suppressed lineages often place the dynasty at the center of their investigation. While these portrayals blend historical research with speculation, they underscore the dynasty's persistent appeal. The combination of sacred authority, hidden knowledge, and enduring mystery captivates viewers in a way few historical narratives can. Through these platforms, the Merovingians reach audiences far beyond academic circles, shaping popular imagination and maintaining relevance in the collective consciousness. The fascination with the Merovingians also reflects a deeper human attraction to secrecy and hidden power. Their story resonates because it embodies the tension between what is visible and what is concealed, between official authority and hidden influence. The dynasty becomes a metaphor for the forces that shape history from behind the scenes, the knowledge and networks that endure long after public memory fades. This enduring allure explains why writers, filmmakers, and historians alike are drawn to the Merovingians, continuously revisiting and reinterpreting their story to explore broader questions about power, lineage, and destiny. Symbolism plays a key role in this cultural persistence. Objects, motifs, and architectural forms associated with the dynasty are reinterpreted in literature, media, and popular culture, serving as markers of continuity and hidden authority. Bees, sacred hair, and coded genealogical references, once tools of medieval custodianship, now function as symbols in storytelling, reinforcing the aura of mystery and sacred lineage. The repeated use of these symbols across time and media suggests a cultural memory that transcends the literal historical record, preserving the essence of the Merovingians even as the details of their lives and reigns remain obscure. The cultural fascination also intersects with conspiracy and speculation, creating a unique blend of myth, history, and imagination. Audiences are captivated by the notion that a hidden lineage might continue to influence the world, whether through secret societies, hidden heirs, or preserved knowledge. This tension between revelation and concealment, fact and legend, mirrors the historical experience of the Merovingians themselves, whose survival depended on discretion, secrecy, and strategic concealment. By engaging with these narratives, contemporary audiences participate in the ongoing process of discovery, interpretation, and imagination, bridging the centuries that separate them from the medieval past. Educational and historical communities have also contributed to this cultural legacy. Scholars who investigate Merovingian genealogy, symbolism, and influence provide frameworks for understanding both the dynasty's historical significance and its lasting mythic power. By studying artifacts, manuscripts, and genealogical records, they illuminate the subtle mechanisms through which the dynasty persisted, while simultaneously providing inspiration for further exploration in media, literature, and art. This interplay between scholarly research and cultural representation ensures that the Merovingians remain both historically relevant and imaginatively compelling. Ultimately, the Merovingians' cultural impact is a testament to the enduring power of story, symbol, and memory. Their sacred bloodline, once targeted for erasure, survives not only in hidden manuscripts and genealogical threads, but also in the collective imagination of societies across the world. Through literature, art, media, and scholarly inquiry, the dynasty continues to captivate, reminding us that the allure of hidden knowledge, sacred authority, and mystery transcends time. The Merovingians are more than a historical curiosity. They are a living symbol of continuity, secrecy, and the persistent human fascination with what lies just beyond the visible world. The dynasty's presence in cultural imagination also serves as a bridge between the past and present, connecting audiences with centuries of hidden history, myth, and sacred authority. Through engagement with these stories, people participate in an ongoing dialogue about power, legacy, and the ways in which knowledge and influence endure. The Merovingians, in this sense, are not simply relics of the past, but active participants in contemporary culture, shaping perceptions, inspiring inquiry, and sustaining the allure of mystery. Their story reminds us that even when rulers vanish from the public record, the echoes of their lineage, symbolism, and authority can continue to shape imagination and culture for generations to come. As we arrive at the final reflections on the Merovingian bloodline, it becomes clear that their story is not simply one of kings and kingdoms, of battles and crowns, but of survival, secrecy, and enduring influence that defies conventional historical narratives. The dynasty, once declared extinct by chroniclers and suppressed by political rivals, continues to live on, if not in the public record, then in the shadows of genealogy, symbol, and memory. The journey through centuries of suppression, rediscovery, myth-making, and cultural fascination reveals a single enduring truth. The Merovingians, whether visible or hidden, remain a force that shapes how we understand history and power. The essence of their survival lies in the careful interplay of concealment and preservation. From medieval monasteries safeguarding cryptic manuscripts to secret societies maintaining coded genealogies, the Merovingians' custodians ensured that the sacred bloodline could endure despite centuries of attempts to erase it. Sacred relics, symbolic motifs, and carefully orchestrated marriages allowed the dynasty to persist quietly within noble lineages, embedding itself in European history in ways often invisible to the casual observer. Each act of preservation, whether through ritual, symbolism, or secret stewardship, speaks to an extraordinary awareness of the fragility and power of lineage. Reflecting on their story, we recognize that the Merovingians operated in multiple dimensions of influence. Publicly, they were kings, warriors, and political actors, navigating the volatile landscape of early medieval Europe. Privately, they cultivated sacred authority, symbolic power, and esoteric knowledge, understanding that true legacy is often hidden from view. This dual existence, a visible presence in history and a concealed influence in the undercurrents of power, allowed them to endure even as public perception shifted against them. The sacred hair, the coded manuscripts, and the hidden heirs all became tools of continuity, ensuring that the essence of the dynasty remained intact even when its authority was challenged. The modern rediscovery and fascination with the Merovingians underscore the enduring resonance of their legacy. Scholars, historians, and enthusiasts uncover fragments of the bloodline story in manuscripts, genealogical records, and symbolic motifs, piecing together a picture deliberately obscured by centuries of suppression. Contemporary interest ranges from academic inquiry to speculative exploration, yet each engagement with the dynasty reinforces the sense that history is not fixed, that the past is not simply what was recorded, and that the influence of sacred bloodlines may operate in ways subtle, symbolic, and enduring. The very act of rediscovery becomes part of the Merovingians' continuing narrative. Myths and legends have further amplified the dynasty's endurance. Tales of hidden heirs, sacred relics, and prophetic knowledge have kept the Merovingians alive in the imagination, blurring the boundaries between history and folklore. These narratives, while often fantastical, carry an important truth. The story of a sacred bloodline is never entirely erased. Myths preserve what suppression seeks to destroy. They encode memory, ritual, and identity in ways that transcend simple documentation, ensuring that the dynasty's symbolic and cultural power persists long after its political authority has waned. The Merovingians, through legend, continue to speak across centuries. The interplay between secrecy and revelation also highlights a profound lesson about power itself. The Merovingians remind us that true authority is not solely measured by armies, titles, or public acclaim, but by the ability to endure across generations, to influence quietly, and to preserve knowledge that others might seek to suppress. The sacred bloodline becomes a metaphor for continuity, resilience, and subtle influence, a model for understanding how legacy can survive in the spaces between visibility and concealment. In this sense, the dynasty's history is both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. Those who understand the value of secrecy, symbolism, and continuity can wield influence far beyond what is immediately apparent. Their story also challenges the way we understand history. The deliberate suppression of the Merovingians, the rewriting of chronicles, and the obscuring of genealogical records illustrate that history is rarely neutral. It is curated, contested, and often shaped by those in power to serve their interests. Yet the persistence of the Merovingians demonstrates that truth, or at least continuity, finds ways to survive even in the face of systematic erasure. By examining the dynasty through the lenses of legend, archaeology, and modern investigation, We begin to see history not as a fixed narrative, but as a living dialogue between visibility and secrecy, suppression and preservation. Culturally, the Merovingians continue to exert influence through literature, art, media, and popular imagination. They inspire stories of hidden kings, secret knowledge, and enduring power. Their symbols appear in architecture, manuscripts, and ceremonial objects, connecting the past to the present.